Nearly exactly 6 years ago, horror creator and musician Aidan Elliott released a video essay called ARGs, We Are Doing Them Wrong, to his side channel Bluewood Films. This video is long gone, deleted, and quite hard to track down nowadays. I'll link the Internet Archive copy in the description if you're curious, but I really don't think it's worth your time. You might know Aidan for creating The Sun Vanished, an incredibly popular ARG where the sun vanishes. There are tons of videos online about it, and more than 500,000 people followed the story. He knows his stuff. However, this video was before he began The Sun Vanished, instead being created when he was in the middle of his older, much less popular, and much more widely critiqued series, Cave of Shadows. I'm not going to talk about Cave of Shadows too in depth here, it's not really what this video is about, and also there's a really good analysis of it by the YouTuber Voices in Your Headphones, who utterly dismantles the entire project. There's not really a point, and I'd recommend you'd watch that if you're wondering anything about what that is. The summary is, if you cared about ARGs at the time, you probably knew who Aidan Elliott was, and watched this video. I was one of those people. This video is very simple. It talks about ERR, a quote-unquote ARG creator, who stole quite a lot of content from other horror YouTubers. He then goes on to discuss how this is a facet of how ARGs at that time were caring less about a unifying story and more about creepy visuals and codes. Quite ironic coming from the guy who created a web series that's 2/3 entirely creepy visuals and codes, but whatever, he was right. In 2016 to 2018 especially, when this video was released, ARGs were quite weak. You can check old Nightmind and Scare Theater videos from the time. There are only a couple real highlights that aren't by well-known creators such as Wham City, or pieces that aren't really even horror. It all felt the same, relying on a weird surreal imagery without actually interesting plot or heart. It was either Monster in the Woods or serial killer tape. That was it. There was nothing more to it. Over time, though, with more high-quality original horror web series coming out, such as Petscop or one of my personal favorites, Pizza Time Pizza, lower-quality, plotless ARGs were thrown to the wayside for ones that spun much more interesting webs. And from this new batch came one of the most revolutionary ARGs of this period, Local 58. Local 58 is a simple web series, the concept being recordings of an older public access network that exists in a strange alternate universe where the moon is an eldritch being planning to kill us all. It's fun, it's family friendly and all of that, nothing weird here. The series is very well made, each video really immersing you into its world, feeling like you've accidentally changed the channel on a strange network you aren't supposed to see. It's really good, and created by somebody who knows the craft, one Chris Straub of Candle Cove and Brood Hollow fame. The series helped draw in a new genre of online horror web series with its sudden popularity, a genre known as analog horror. We are now in 2022, 5 years after Local 58's original premiere. I genuinely cannot think of a well-known horror web series released in the last 2 to 3 years that was not an analog horror work. Only 2 other ones that aren't Local 58 I would classify as good.
We are in hell. Online horror is dead and God died with it. There's only one way to stop this. To knock off an obscure video by a bad ARG creator in the hopes of creating good content and improve the online horror that exists now. Let's talk about analog horror. Why are we doing it wrong?
So to understand the flaws with modern analog horror, and why even ones that I quite like, yes, including Local 58, fall into the same traps, I've made a political compass of sorts. We're going to be talking about all the series on this chart, but the idea is to rank the series on 2 factors: story and concepts, the ideas that they want to show you, and the scares, how they show you it. And analyzing these series by both of these factors shows us some really interesting dichotomies, telling us that we have to perfect both to create a truly interesting horror web series. I'm going to talk about each of these series from best to worst. I know you guys want to hear me yell about how much the Walton Files can suck my schlong, but you're going to have to wait a minute. And I want that watch retention time, but don't tell anyone. And if you've never seen the shows, don't worry. I won't have any major spoilers. I'll talk about some basic plot concepts but never go in too deep. I'm not analyzing any of the story here. There are hundreds of videos that do that already for all of these shows. Instead, I'm analyzing the presentation of the story. The best analog horror series, with no competition, is Local 58. It started it all. Every one of these series owes their entire lifespan to it. Multiple knock it off, and it can't not be number one, really. It's also, by far, the one that presents itself the best. As I go through these series and list each of their flaws, I'll point to Local 58 quite a lot to show you how to do this type of series right. It's incredibly well made, and probably one of the only shows I'll mention here that I think is absolutely worth watching in full. The other show on this list that I think is worth your time is Monument Mythos, created by Alex Kansas. Monument Mythos is great for one reason: subtlety. Alex really holds himself back on every one of these videos, and you're going to see for future series that all of them have a similar issue. Their horror isn't subtle at all. Every one of these series relies on a spooky face or some unnerving text that feels completely out of place in this context to put in the horror. Hell, even Local 58 has moments like this. Monument Mythos, however, does the exact opposite. It feels like you're watching a real PSA from an alternate universe. Its horrors are treated as regular. Take the first video, Liberty Lurker. The idea is terrifying, some ominous creature living inside the Statue of Liberty, the first of many monument-residing creepies shown in this series. But the ending, saying, if you have family members who were last seen at Ellis Island between the years 1949 and 1954, you may be entitled to financial compensation, really makes it all click. This creature is treated as completely normal by the story, and I love that a lot. To understand why, we're going to have to talk about the format that it's in. I've never talked about the specifics of analog horror because I kind of assumed everyone would get it, but the idea is that these videos look like they're recorded on analog technology, mainly VHS tapes and cassettes. The stories and series they create are supposed to act like you would find them on a VHS tape in some thrift store or in an unlabeled box or whatever before uncovering a dark secret. But the baking factor is the context that these tapes were supposed to be for. Local 58 was supposed to be recordings of an old public access network, and that worked in its favor heavily, because you could suspend your disbelief when really horrific stuff happened. Station hijackings, especially in local areas, are a real and regular thing, and the idea is that these are a recording of really distressing interferences that hint to something darker behind the scenes. It's why it's clicked so well. Monument Mythos is the same. It's supposed to be in the context of PSAs and news reports, and the series plays that completely straight. It feels like real PSAs the government would make if they were hypothetically in this situation. It doesn't add in spooky images or glitches or scary text to reinforce its spook factor. It relies entirely on the situation itself, the idea that this could be real. It never goes overboard, making it feel true to life, hitting deeper home, and really investing whoever is watching the story. Monument Mythos, despite its minor popularity with some folk, in my opinion, is dreadfully underrated. The fact that the much weaker series we're about to discuss are all talked about much more than this one is heartbreaking, and shows that viewers don't often care about how well crafted a story and its world is, but how many spooky moments you can fit into it. The next series is Gemini Home Entertainment, which is created by Remy Abode, and this is where it gets truly interesting. It's right in the middle of my official analog horror series ranking, and that's probably because it's a real mixed bag storytelling-wise. It ends up hinting at a lot of the issues on our next two series, the Mandela Catalogue and the Walton Files, will really fuck up when we start discussing them. However, its scares are just so good and interestingly made that I can't help but enjoy the series, at least somewhat. The idea is that Earth has been invaded by alien creatures known as woodcrawlers, strange, many-legged beings who are incredibly invasive and can move through any terrain. They kill and then become their victims in a way, a parasite, on the Earth. It really is an excellent idea for a spooky web series, and the idea that nobody is who they seem can really hit close to home at times. However, the way it's presented often makes it feel weak. Let's compare the first episode to other series we've discussed, World Weirdest Animals. The idea is that Gemini is a production company creating shitty instructional VHS tapes to fill retail stores and bargain bins. Think of what Red Letter Media would talk about on Wheel of the Worst. This video feels like a real bargain bin VHS tape of that kind to show in class or to kids, etc. Then the third creature appears, the wood crawler. It begins in a really interesting fashion, acting as if this was a real actual Animal Planet Kids discussion of this eldritch abomination, which is really terrifying. And then the screen says, "You will hear screaming," and it becomes some weird found footage thing, and I'm completely taken out of the experience. This would not happen in any situation. It's a sudden shift into horror and not supposed to be an actual VHS tape in a horrific world. It feels not like an alternate world I'm stepping into, but a horror web series I am watching, and I don't like that very much. If this series didn't suddenly transition into horror that would never work in the real world the way it did, I probably wouldn't notice the woodcrawler's limbs being made of cardboard or the music suddenly cutting out for no good reason other than to raise tension. Or how, despite the fact that this is supposed to be a VHS with a specific format, we suddenly transition into a completely different type of video, just to spook you more. It's so obviously designed to be more tense and scary, and not like it's an actual VHS tape, which doesn't make sense in a format whose entire point is to feel like a VHS tape. Why would you do this? However, I can't help but enjoy Gemini. It's obviously not a top-tier horror web series, but the scares are so good and the idea is so unnerving that I enjoyed my time watching through it. It's quite a creative show. It's just that I can't possibly be invested in a world that doesn't feel real, and you're gonna hear a lot more of that for the next two series. The popularity of Alex Kister's The Mandela Catalogue truly confuses me. I mean, it kinda makes sense, because it's a knockoff of every other analog horror web series, am I right? No, but seriously, we have to talk about this because oh my god. Let's look at the second video, the think principle. The idea is what to do if clones, alternates, quote-unquote, of you or people you know come into your home. Seems very similar to Gemini. Then we have a spooky moment where a multi-step plan is processed with the final step being to kill yourself. Seems very similar to Local 58. Hell, the entire series has massive visual similarities to Monument Mythos. To be clear here, there's a fine line between friendly inspiration and knocking someone off, but it really feels like Alex mixed all the scary elements that he liked into these series, put them into a blender, and tried to do his own thing with it. It kinda became more original with elements of fear of home invasion, but even then, Gemini did this like half a year before the Mandela Catalogue did. It's all just someone else's stuff. And I think the proof of this is how disjointed the whole thing feels. Everything is shown in these tapes, from TV broadcasts to instructional tapes to PSAs to random phone conversations to whatever the hell Alex finds in his YouTube feed. It's a jumbled mess of every scary web series Alex liked without really understanding why they were all so great. There's a really interesting video on this site where horror YouTuber Goose Boost talks about the Mandela Catalogue and his personal issues with the series, and I think he says it better than I ever could. Link in the description for the whole video. It's really good if you're interested in this sort of thing. Cough, cough.
Look, and that's not even... What the... That's not even from the 90s. That's just straight... That's just straight up, like, footage from the 70s from like, a Super 8 camera. This isn't even VHS anymore. Like, do you understand why this is frustrating? Like, that's what I'm talking about. This is like... This is... You gotta suspend your disbelief, but I can't because I grew up with this. This is real.
You see what I'm getting at here? Each of these stories is supposed to have this context, this idea of what these tapes are supposed to be, stringing them together. But what is the Mandela Catalogue? What is it supposed to be? It's not any specific type of VHS. What VHS tape would have these random ass phone calls in the middle of itself? And it's not haunted or fucked with because there's no ghost and this isn't being shown live. What is it outside of an art project that feels like a random mishmash of every other analog horror series? Then there's the scares. Nearly every one of the scary moments in the Mandela Catalogue is cheap as all hell. They rely entirely on spooky distorted faces and sudden jumps to glitches and scaly text or whatever. It's the exact opposite of Monument Mythos, where that series is so great because of how subtle and real every unnerving idea felt. This relies entirely on shoving what is spooky directly into your face. Maybe that makes more people like it. Maybe it's a lot more accessible to have every spooky moment obvious and shown to you. But Christ, don't act like it's true horror. Great world building, no cheap jump scares. Did we watch the same series? Nearly every scare was just a spooky face jumping out of nowhere. That's a jump scare. That's literally the definition of it. My favorite moment in this series is this moment in the first video that feels just like a weird YouTube poop.
Very special message from an angel named.
I am the angel Gabriel.
Like, at that point, you're basically just become the horror version of Spencer launches a bagel into Griffin's rectum. And when I'm bringing that video up, you know I'm talking about some real shit.
Sheesh. What? Sheesh. What?
Why did you have to say sheesh?
Sheesh.
I hope you enjoyed the Carly catalog. If Nexpo doesn't do a video on it in the next month, I will kill him. Look, the ideas are alright, they're interesting at times, it's clear the creator put a lot of effort into it. It's just so disjointed and in your face, I can't take it seriously. Alex Kister seems like a really nice guy, and this isn't an attack towards him or his series in any way. I don't hate him, I don't hate this series. I'm just saying that there are absolutely ways this series can improve, because right now, it's quite weak. So let's bring this back to basics. What is wrong with analog horror? What do you need to do it right? Well, I created a simple mnemonic device just for you. LASOR. Lore, authenticity, scares, and originality. First off, lore. You need solid world building to create any ARG, spooky web series, whatever. You're supposed to tell a story that is not in reality, and you have to tell it as if it is in the reality that it happens in. To make it not feel like a jumbled mess, you need solid lore. What type of video is your analog horror web series? Is it a TV show? Is it a PSA? Is it a random educational tape? Whatever. You need that consistency to make sure your audience doesn't feel lost. Next is authenticity. You want this series to feel real, like an actual VHS tape you could find in the world. Play it completely straight. Don't go for the sudden distorted face or creepy text or the audio cutting out. It pulls you out of the scene. Let the unnerving factors speak for themselves. If it's done well, you shouldn't need anything else. Monument Mythos is a great example of this. It's authentic as hell. Next is scares. It's gotta be, scary. Use the innate human fear of death, invasion, drowning, space, anything to suck the fear out of your viewers. Maybe a series of home movies by a kid who just moved into a house and wants to kill him. The fear of moving into a new place or the fear of your house not being good enough for you is a sufficient fear to most people. And to show that, you can have, say, subtle moments in these home movies where you see a hand somewhere in the closet or something leaking out of the wall socket. It's not obvious at first glance, maybe the kid doesn't know it, but something is going on. That's not only scary, but it's real. I know I just kind of knocked off House of Leaves there, but that's the fourth point. Originality. You don't want to make a series that just feels like a knockoff of every other series or some horror game or whatever, because then there's no point to watch yours. You can just watch the other analog horror series that do whatever you do better. Which, I mean, then what's the point? If you combine all of these, you should have a good analog horror series that doesn't shove the horror in your face, while still being really uncomfortable. There are other things you might want, like interesting character personalities or acting, but it feels these are the main things that analog horror creators get wrong. And I think it's mostly because analog horror creators focus more on scaring people than telling an interesting story in an interesting world. And if you've been listening, you might realize that you've heard that thesis before. I didn't base this off Aiden's video on ARGs for a reason. It might just have seemed like an overly long intro, but I genuinely talked about it because I wanted to say how we've kinda gotten in a loop. One creepy web series gets popular, then people knock it off more and more, not understanding what made the original so unique, before moving on to the next web series to knock off. It happened to Meat Sleep, it happened to Local 58, hell, even before both of those, it happened to Marble Hornets and Lonely Girl 15. This is a cycle. Even if this video somehow gets to the creators of shows like the Mandela Catalogue, the Walton Files, or Gemini, even if after this there are no bad analog horror series and we live in a fucking utopia, it's still gonna keep happening. There will be another hit, people will get inspired, think they can make something like that, and it won't be very good. It's a constant on the internet, Xeroxes of Xeroxes of Xeroxes. And that's okay. You can make what you want, I don't really care. Even if in this video I yelled at you for making a bad web series, that's just my dumb opinion. I'm sorry, the creator of the Walton Files, I'm sorry, the creator of the Mandela Catalogue. I just think we need to be more critical about what we view, and try to make everything the best we can be. That doesn't mean your show is bad, or you're a bad person. It just means that you have room to improve. Because even shows like Local 58 or Monument Mythos are flawed. They have bad scares, cheesy at times, weird editing, but their stories are so good I don't care. That's what makes a story like them, series that are ripoffs of other VHS found footage pieces, so enthralling. You don't gotta be perfect or original, just interesting enough for me not to give a shit if you're doing it wrong. I'm Rebecca Kimple, and I hope you have a good night.